the Lord of the Golden Towers. New York was trapped in the economic turmoil of the 1970s. Banks were on the brink of collapse, unemployment rates were soaring, and the real estate market was teetering on the edge of ruin. Yet, amid this gloomy atmosphere, a young entrepreneur named Donald Trump was determined to reshape the city's skyline. Trump possessed the courage to turn risks that everyone else avoided into opportunities. He set his sights on the old Commodore Hotel, a dilapidated relic in the heart of Manhattan that no one dared to touch. Experts and investors claimed the hotel was beyond saving and that investing in the area was sheer madness. But Trump saw things differently. Where others saw rubble, he envisioned a future gleaming like gold. After tough negotiations and months of strategic planning, Trump secured a historic tax abatement from New York State. This was the key move needed to convince investors. For a project that no one else would back, Trump boldly staked his capital and reputation. Construction began. Months of meticulous work and innovative designs transformed the long-abandoned hotel into a modern, luxurious masterpiece. Reborn as the Grand Hyatt New York, its opening day sent shockwaves through the city. This was Trump's first major triumph, cementing his status as a legend in New York's rising business world. But this was only the beginning. With his boldness and visionary moves, Trump soon became a signature presence in Manhattan's skyscraper-studded skyline. With Trump Tower, he fused luxury and grandeur, rewriting the rules of the real estate game. His name was no longer just that of a businessman, it had become a brand. Donald Trump was a leader who turned crises into opportunities, unafraid of risks and unwilling to entertain failure as an option. Rising from New York's darkest days, he established himself as one of the boldest heroes of the business world. Today, the Trump name continues to stand for courage, strategy, and vision in the realm of business.
Don't forget to subscribe and like before we move on to our next story.
In the 1970s, New York languished in the grip of economic chaos. Banks teetered on the edge of insolvency, unemployment surged, and the real estate market hovered near collapse. Yet, amid this bleak landscape, a young and audacious entrepreneur, Donald Trump, resolved to redefine the city's horizon. Trump had the rare boldness to transform risks others shunned into golden opportunities. His gaze fell upon the crumbling Commodore Hotel, a forgotten ruin in Manhattan's core that no one dared to reclaim. Experts dismissed it as a lost cause, and investors deemed the venture lunacy. Trump, however, saw beyond the decay, a shimmering vision of what could be. Through relentless negotiations and meticulous planning, he clinched a groundbreaking tax abatement from New York State, a masterstroke that swayed hesitant investors. Undeterred by the skepticism surrounding the project, Trump wagered his fortune and his name on its success. The transformation began. Months of painstaking effort and visionary design turned the derelict shell into a beacon of modern luxury. When the Grand Hyatt New York opened its doors, it reverberated like a thunderclap across the city. This triumph marked Trump's ascent, establishing him as a titan in New York's burgeoning business elite. Yet this was merely the prologue. With fearless ambition and foresight, Trump etched his mark on Manhattan's towering skyline. Trump Tower rose as a monument to opulence and innovation, rewriting the playbook of real estate. His name transcended that of a mere businessman. It became synonymous with a legacy. Donald Trump emerged as a leader who thrived on adversity, embraced risk, and rejected defeat. From the ashes of New York's darkest hour, he forged a reputation as one of the business world's most intrepid pioneers. Today, the Trump name endures as a symbol of courage, ingenuity, and unrelenting vision. As evening fell over Washington, the lights of the White House still burned brightly. In the Oval Office, Donald Trump sat at his desk, poring over a tax reform plan in deep silence. Spread before him were reports brimming with statistics, analyses, and economists' projections. But Trump didn't need numbers. He needed the stories of real people. A few weeks earlier, at a rally in Michigan, Trump had noticed a man in the crowd. Dressed in a faded worker's jumpsuit, his face etched with years of exhaustion, the man had raised his voice and shouted, "Mr. President, our factory shut down. What are we supposed to do?" Those words had stayed with Trump. Across the country, blue-collar workers were struggling under the weight of high taxes and bad trade deals. While Washington's elite politicians lived in luxury aboard private jets, middle-class Americans fought to make ends meet. And Trump couldn't stand it. By morning, he summoned his cabinet and spoke with a steely resolve. For years, this country's middle class has been exploited. We're going to deliver tax cuts, not to the wealthy, but to workers and small businesses. We'll bring incentives to keep big companies' profits here in America. From now on, the winners won't be the lobbyists in Washington, it'll be the people. Opponents called the plan impossible. The press predicted Trump's failure. But he didn't care. He was never one to shy away from a fight. He crafted the tax reform package and pushed Congress hard. When politicians resisted, he took his case straight to the people at rallies. "I'm fighting for you. I don't care about the puppets in Washington. I hear your voices." After days of fierce battles and heated debates, the historic tax reform became law. The working class could finally breathe, and small businesses began to thrive. That Michigan worker, and millions like him, started earning more and paying less in taxes. At a rally celebrating this victory, Trump turned to the crowd with a smile. "I gave you my word. I said we'd make the middle class strong again. And now, we're winning together." With his tough demeanor and unwavering determination, Donald Trump upended Washington's traditional politics and proved himself the fiercest champion of the American worker. A leader of steel. Through the windows of the Oval Office, the White House garden could be seen, but Trump's eyes were fixed far away, on diplomatic battlefields across the ocean. On his desk were intelligence reports, military analyses, and statements from world leaders. In recent years, America had fought unnecessary wars, lost trade deals, and been exploited by its allies. Trump was not going to make a speech and stand aside, as past presidents had done. He was determined to prove that America was not weak, that it was once again the world's superpower. One day, when he traveled to Europe for a NATO meeting, other world leaders were gathered in the luxury lounge of the hotel. They were all waiting for Trump to arrive, but they expected him to speak in the usual diplomatic style. Trump walked through the door, gripped his desk hard, and said directly to their faces, "America is not your ATM machine. We have been carrying the burden of your defense budget for decades. It's time for you to pay your fair share. Either you pay your share or we go our own way." There was silence in the hall. The European leaders looked at each other with worried eyes. They had expected soft words like previous presidents, but Trump had no intention of playing games. He sent a clear message to NATO countries: America will no longer be robbed. Then the trade war with China began. For years, America's economic order had been disrupted by China's aggressive trade policies. Ignoring the rhetoric of the old order in Washington that we have to get along with China, Trump declared to the world, "If you want to trade with America, we make the rules. The era of weak governments is over, now you have a real leader." He imposed high tariffs, cornered China, and finally turned the trade deal in America's favor. His opponents were furious. The media criticized his tough stance. But Trump, as usual, didn't care. He was making history. One day, when asked about his tough stance at a press conference, he sat back and replied with his usual confident smile, "I'm not here to please people, I'm here to make America strong again." And indeed he did. He was a leader of steel who bowed to no one, who pounded his fist on the table and put America's interests above all else.